Hello, this is Tom Ryan Remembers. We're here with Tom Ryan and Barbara Engelhardt, and my name is Kevin Ryan. Today is July 25th, and today Tom and I is going to talk about camping. Okay?
Sounds good. We really enjoyed camping trips, and we started out with a tent that we borrowed from Marilyn's father, and he was the founder of the Shortwave Radio Club in Waukegan, and they would go out on camping trips and then learn how to do shortwave radio. And Marilyn even got a license, a novice license, so that she could send shortwave. Well, he had this army tent that was from World War One, and he had it in storage and hadn't used it in years. So he dug that out and put it up in the backyard, and I painted it with a waterproofing compound that when it dried, it was supposed to be waterproof. I didn't trust that tent, and luckily we never went through a rainstorm with it. But we did go to Devil's Lake, which was a short drive, like 50 miles up into Wisconsin, and try it out. And we didn't have a trailer at all. We just put it on the ground and we slept there overnight, and that was really fun. Everybody enjoyed that. So we went back home and we decided that we should get a trailer. And we had just bought a newer car, not a new car. It was a 67 Chevy, and it was a newer car to us. I had never owned a new car. And so then we looked around for a trailer that we could hook to it. And we found one in the want ads, and it was for sale, and this guy had built it, but his wife didn't like camping, and so he wanted to sell it. He was a craftsman. He worked hard on it, and he built a beautiful, as far as craftsmanship, trailer. But he used materials from the junkyard, car parts, and he used heavy wood for the sides of it, and it was just too heavy for the car we had. But we managed with it, and we decided after a couple of trips to some state parks to take this trailer, homemade trailer, with a tent on top. Now that tent wasn't from World War One, probably from World War II, and it luckily would stand.
Sorry, and the car is a 57 Chevy, not a 67.
Yeah, 57 Chevy, right.
Yeah.
And now we're about 1961, and the car it doesn't have air conditioning, and it's just a four-door car. And we pulled it around to different state parks and tried it out, and it worked pretty well on short trips. We'd go out with the Haltemans. They were Marilyn's brother and Joe and Irene, and their 6 kids, and were about the same age as you 4 kids. So you had 10 kids together, and then Grandma went along, and of course all these 10 kids were her grandchildren. Now this is Phyllis, my sister, and she went along with us when we decided finally that we were ready for the big time, and we went to Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. So we went out, and away we went. And it was a wonderful trip, but we got up to Minnesota, and we went to a campground, and it rained really hard, and it was a real test of that tent. And it stood the tent, but it rattled the trailer and rattled the tent. And we told you kids, now when it's raining and the tent is all wet, don't put your fingers on the tent, or it'll start a leak, and it'll come right down your finger, and then it'll just like be a stream of water coming down. So don't touch the tent. So that they were pretty young, and Ginger was only 6 months old when we were doing this, and so we went through that rainstorm in Minnesota, and that was a test. So
Later on in Boy Scouts, we got the same lecture, and we were an expert already from that.
You already knew about that. So we went over the plains of South Dakota and no air conditioning in the car, and it was July, and it was pretty hot. And I can remember Dan standing up on the front seat right beside Marilyn, and Marilyn had a wash rag, and it was with cold water on it, and she was wiping his face so he could be cool because he was really hot. And I think she must have done that with each one of you as we went through the hot plains, and vowed we would get air conditioning in our car as soon as we got home. And so we went on, and we got into the mountains. And of course, we'd never been in the Rocky Mountains or any mountains, so we didn't know much about them. But as you gain altitude, it gets cooler, about 3 degrees for every 1,000 feet. And when you get up to 4,000 or 5,000 feet, it isn't hot anymore. In fact, when we got to Yellowstone Park, which is like 8,000 feet, 3 times 8 is 24 degrees below the hot 90s something plains. And at night, when this thin air, the air is very thin up there because of the air pressure, the heat escapes from the ground very rapidly as the sun goes down. And by midnight, it's freezing cold. It feels like it's freezing. It's really cold. And we weren't prepared for that. We didn't know that happened in the Rocky Mountains. And we didn't have any heavy clothes. We just had shorts and summer clothes. So we had to go into town and buy sweatshirts and pants so that you kids wouldn't be freezing. But the first night, I remember Ginger slept right with Marilyn in the same sleeping bag to keep warm. And we survived that. We learned something about the mountains. The mountains are cool in the summer, and that's why people go to the mountains to cool off. We didn't even know that. And so the campground was pretty full. And the national parks have had a problem with bears. And they told at the gate, don't feed the bears. And so we knew not to feed the bears. But early on, they used to take groups of people to the garbage dump, and then they had bleachers, and the people could watch the bears rummage through the garbage, and that was entertainment. But the park said that's not natural. The national park is supposed to don't feed the animals, let them live in a normal, natural life. That was hard because people either wanted to hunt them and shoot them or feed them. And neither, we were just supposed to watch them and see how they behaved in their natural habitat. And by then, 15 million buffalo had been killed out on the plains, and the only buffalo still left alive were in Yellowstone Park. And so we got to see them. And so that little herd in Yellowstone Park has now bloomed out into a couple of thousand that are around the country, and people are even raising buffalo.
Can we go back a little bit? Camping there and the bears.
Oh, sure. The bears used to come into our campground.
There's a story about mom cooking spaghetti.
Right. That was coming. Oh, so okay. We had to cook our food on an outdoor grill, and we were cooking. Marilyn was making spaghetti, and people started hollering that there's a bear. Well, it turns out that her spaghetti, she kept boiling it, and it couldn't she tasted it, and it wasn't finished. So we learned another thing, that when you get at high altitude, water boils at a lower temperature. And so even though the water may be boiling and look like, you assume it's, boiling hot, it is boiling hot, but at high 8,000 feet, it's not very hot. And so it wasn't cooking the spaghetti. But when we heard that bears are in the campground, everybody would take a kettle and a wooden spoon and beat on the kettle and make noise that was supposed to chase the bears away. They weren't afraid of that at all. They just marched right in. They knew they were after the food. We'd been warned to put all of our food in the car and lock the car doors and run up the windows and then get into the tent and get out, or the trailer, and not be out where the bears were. The bears wouldn't bother you. They just wanted the food. But if you even left your car window open a few inches to let it cool off, the bear would just stick his claws in there and rip the window out to get at the food. So that was kind of dangerous, but exciting. And we got in our tent, and the bear came up and smelled the spaghetti and wasn't the least bit interested in eating it. Of course, didn't have any meat in it. And so he went on to other campgrounds. But when we got back out there, we never did eat that spaghetti because it never did get really cooked. And so we were kind of out of meal, and that, but it was a great adventure to see the bears come right up to our cooking pot. I remember the kids weren't a bit afraid of the bears. I mean, you kids just watched them and big eyes and everything. Nobody was afraid, and it really had something to be afraid of. I can remember later we were walking down a trail, and there were flies or bees buzzing around Marie's head, and she was screaming and everything because these bees were swinging around them, and of course they wouldn't hurt her, but the bear would have. But she was more afraid of the buzzing bees than the bear. So we saw lots of wildlife, and it was an exciting trip, and everybody had a good time. Now these are just incidents; some of them kind of negative, but all of us loved camping, and everybody in the family, when we say we're going to go on another camping trip, it was yippee, and where are we going to go? So even though we had problems, one other problem we had when we were coming into Sheridan, Wyoming, way over on the eastern side of Wyoming, that's where we hit the mountains the first time in our lives. And we were going downhill, and this heavy trailer, handmade trailer that we had bought for $350, made out of old car parts and so on, was too heavy for the car, and it was pushing the car, and the car going downhill. I had my foot on the brake to keep it from going too fast, and the brakes went out. The brakes got so hot from me pressing on them. Well, I learned later that there's a trick to driving a car in the mountains that I had I didn't know anything about that. And so I had not driven the car properly, and our brakes went out. They got so hot that they got slippery, and they wouldn't stop the car anymore. And we were going down a mountain with all of us in the car with no brakes. And we were, I slowed down the car, should have done that earlier by putting it in second gear, and finally got it going slower, using the gear as a brake. And we pulled into a gas station in Sheridan, Wyoming. And I told the gas station man, I think we need new brakes. I wrecked the brakes coming down the mountain, and I told him what happened. He says, really an honest guy. He said, that's all right. Just park the car over here and wait half an hour or so, and it'll be fine. You don't need new brakes. That happens here all the time with you greenhorns that don't know how to drive in the mountains. So sure enough, that was nice. We got a tank full of gas from them, and the expense of new brakes, I thought, well, we didn't have much money, and it would have been very difficult. It reminded me that in the Grapes of Wrath, they were always having car trouble, and they'd fix it themselves because they didn't have any money to have a mechanic fix their Model T Ford. Mm-hmm. Anyway, away we went again, and we were on our way to Rocky Mountain National Park. And halfway there, we realized we've been in the mountains, and in the national parks, they don't have showers. They have cold water only. It was deliberate. They didn't want things to get too fancy. And this was not a resort. This was just an opportunity to commune with nature and see wildlife and see the mountains, and not it wasn't a luxury vacation. So and even the toilets were pit toilets. And so we were kind of in need of a shower. And so we stopped at a motel. And we just got into Colorado, and it was way out in the middle of nowhere. And we stopped at this motel. And we figured we could pay for one night, and then we would all get a shower and get kind of cleaned up and have a good night's sleep before we went on to Rocky Mountain National Park. Well, it worked fine. Now, we told you kids that there are people on the other side of the wall. We're in a motel, and you can't yell and jump and play, jump up and down on the bed and holler, because there's people on the other side of the wall, and you'll bother them, and they're trying to go to sleep. So the kids looked at each other with big eyes, and they started telling each other, there are people in the wall, and you got to be really quiet, like they were ghosts or some kind of monsters. And we were just trying to get you to be quiet. So we had to tell her, no, they're just on the other side of the wall. They're not in the wall. Oh, okay. So we got a good night's sleep, and away we went for Rocky Mountain National Park. Well, they didn't have any bears at Rocky Mountain National Park. They're very rare even now. And they had learned how to, if the bears kept coming into the campgrounds, finally the park rangers had to put them in, had a cage. It had to be a really strong cage, because those bears are really strong. And you'd lure the bear into the cage with some food and then slam the door behind him. And then that cage would be lifted by a crane onto a pickup truck and taken way up in the mountains, maybe a couple of 100 miles. Well, not a couple of 100 miles, but at least 100 miles away from the campgrounds. And the bear would be released. Now, bears can smell like 3 or 4 miles from where they are. They can smell game and hunt them down. So the bears could find their way back if they wanted to. And if they did, they had reached the point where some of the bears had to be euthanized. They had to be shot because they kept coming back to the campground. And they, of course, closed the garbage dump down, and they made a rule that all garbage every day went out in garbage trucks and carried outside the park, so there wouldn't be any garbage dump for the bears to eat from. So Rocky Mountain National Park had the same rules, and we didn't have any contact with bears at all there. But we were getting to be pretty experienced campers by then, and we had learned how to handle the brakes, and it was cool in the mountains at 8,000 feet, just about right, except for the middle of the night. And so we would have campfires and sit around the campfires, and we met a lot of people in those campgrounds that would give us advice on how to survive better and how to do it the right way. And they advised us, and we even made friends. I remember meeting one, a Mormon man. I'd never met a Mormon. And he, of course, every Mormon is a missionary. And he started telling us, and when I started asking questions about the Mormon faith, he started telling me, and it was kind of a lifelong interest I had in the Mormons, and read books about them. No Man Knows My History, I remember, was the first Mormon historian written story about them, about Joseph Smith. And so his name was Gardner, and we kept contact with each other by mail after the trip, and he sent me a book that he'd had all his life about the Mormon faith. So nice. That was just an example. We met.
Another one is the guy. Remember, we were camping in Rocky Mountain National Park, and we were getting low on food. And this guy comes up, and he had just been fishing, and on a tree branch he had 7 trout, and we were 7 in our party. And he stopped by, and we were talking with him, and he said, "You guys, there's 7 of you," and he just gave us the fish.
He just enjoyed catching them. He didn't want to eat them. And we had a feast in Maryland.
Right. Grandma cooked them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it was. We met some interesting people and enjoyed that as much as the trips and new experiences. And so
walk around the campground, and people would start talking with people, and you just kind of make the loop, and one after the other. So yeah,
Right.
hardly
Well, we had
saw you.
a routine. We'd get into a new campground and we'd unhitch the trailer, and then Marilyn would get things ready and get a meal ready, and we would go on exploration. I think that's what we called it, an exploration, and we would walk on the loop trail around
It
the
was
park.
reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance, yeah. And we had to have emergency rations, of course, usually candy bars
Yeah.
that I'd carry along. And this would keep you busy and out of her hair while she got the supper ready. And then by the time we walked the loop very slowly, as you say, meeting people, talking to people, and then we'd be back at our campsite and ready, supper was ready. Yeah, she worked very hard. And I did most of the driving, but I think that was the easiest job, really. She took care of 4 little kids. Ginger was still in diapers. She was only 6 months old. And so it was 1961, and the car was about 4 years old. And so when we got home, we had air conditioning put in that car, and we used it on some short trips. We went to
Right. So I think what we need to do here is, this is the story of Bluey, the camper,
Yeah.
and there's 2 other campers that we had, and we can save those for different episodes.
Oh, okay, another episode, because
Yeah.
the next one we went to Mexico. So, okay, that'll be good.
That's the team.
Another episode.
Okay, good.